Thank you, Anthony, for this very kind introduction. After such a nice introduction, normally it can only go wrong because the level of expectation then is difficult to meet. First, let me just say that I'm very happy that you're all here, that this community is being established among research services, among libraries. We have tried to develop our own sector here dynamically over the last years with the creation of the European Parliamentary Research Service, the Members' Research, many new functionalities. And of course, that's a service which maybe first is there for the members, but we would also understand ourselves as a hub for research services and libraries in the member states, especially what concerns European affairs, because it's very natural that not every national research service can so much go into detail and into depth on European affairs. So if we can be helpful to empower national parliaments in their own role in the process, we are very happy to do that. So Anthony has asked me to say a few words on where we are in Europe, and in fact, I think the last years have given a lot of reason to try to more deeply understand where we are. And I must say, personally, I've sometimes been a bit annoyed that when Europe is being discussed, it seems that the only word that comes to people's mind is crisis. And very often the debate starts with crisis, and then it's about crisis and ends with crisis. And you could then come to the conclusion that the European Union is mainly about crisis, which is something which I think is very wrong. In fact, it's useful, before we come to crisis, to think a moment, what have we been achieving over the last 25 years through European integration? And I would say it's quite a lot, and it's, we could say, of historical dimension. I think what we achieved since 1989, 1990, which was the big turning point, the last big turning point of European history, first is that totalitarian systems disappeared from our continent. And that's something very important because a large part of the 20th century history was dominated by this in different forms. Democracy, human rights, market economy have been enlarged over the continent to large parts of Central Eastern Europe. We could say has moved 1,000 kilometers to the west. Millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of people globally have been integrated into the market. And also, maybe nowadays this looks not so surprising, also the euro has been established. I can tell you 25 years ago, yes, there was a decision, but was everybody optimistic that it would work and that finally, national currencies would be exchanged against the European currency? Not really. I mean, it was a big fight, and nowadays the euro, with all the problems that also exist, is the second reserve currency around the world. But at the same time, we feel that something is changing. We can no longer say the tendencies, the trends that were established by basically the collapse of the Soviet Union, all these trends are just in continuation and continue to exist. It seems that after one generation, our conditions for doing politics have changed. And it's useful maybe to start with our external environment. When we look at our external environment, we see that the relationship between the European Union and Russia has fundamentally changed. The period where the extension of Western institutions further eastwards was tolerated is definitely over. We've seen it in Georgia, we have seen it in Ukraine, that Russia is establishing a kind of principle that any kind of further integration of Western institutions to the east is stopped, and if need be, with military means. If we look to the south, we have the Islamic world, and if we are kind, we are saying the Islamic world is in turmoil. That's the kind expression. We could also come to the conclusion that they are going through some kind of religious confessional wars, definitely what we are seeing in Syria and Iraq. But in many of those states, even basic state functions are no longer guaranteed. And Europe is faced with the fallout of this situation in the form of uncontrolled immigration, terrorism, and so on, refugees. And when we look to the West, first there's a lot of water, but then there are the United States of America. And since 1945, we could always basically be sure that the United States of America would go for a free global system, an open global system, would in fact be the guarantors of this. And we've now seen with the presidential elections that for the first time ever, we have a president who has his own doubts about whether this is the right course. And I think this is also a gentle expression of the situation. So also there, we can no longer automatically take for granted that the world as we have known it since 1945 and that the rules of the international systems as they were established after 1945 are simply continuing into the future. And if we are looking north, we are having Brexit. I remember that Chancellor Kohl at the time was very happy to say, now we have established German unification and all our neighbors are our friends. If we look around the European Union nowadays, we are rather seeing trouble and challenge, and that's something which we have to realize. Inside, the challenges are also enormously. We are still suffering from the knock-on effect of financial crisis, very much elevated debt levels, and of course those debt levels then, in order to cope with them, led to cuts into social security system, and a general loss of credibility of the economic system. I also believe it's a fair description to say that the economic system is now in better shape, but we shouldn't forget that we are still in intensive care. Our economy is not functioning under normal conditions, normal interest, normal money supply, but we are functioning under intensive care conditions, and you know when you are in intensive care, you might feel well, but you are feeling well because you are fed and because you are breathing. And if those aids would be taken away, you don't know whether you would still feel so well. So that test of normalization of the economic conditions is still ahead of us, and it's not completely sure what will be the effects. Globalization has brought insecurity for those who are less able to compete, and digitalization is transforming the economy quite quickly. So in technology, normally it's called disruption, but that disruption is not only a technological disruption, it's also an economical disruption, and I would argue it's also a political disruption. Because the insecurity being created from outside and inside is leading to a change in our party systems. We could go through individual countries, and maybe 10 years ago, the norm was still that when there was a change of government, you had an alternation between moderate center-right and moderate center-left. And then moderate center-right, and then moderate center-left, and then you see, surely important policy choices, but the systemic issue was no longer there. That is no longer to be taken for granted. Political competition has changed, and very often the other party that is challenging and looking for the lead of the country is not a moderate party of the other kind, but is a party which is generally called populist. So the question is, what is the new dividing line? From my point of view, the new dividing line is between open or closed. So open society inside the country, towards the European Union, towards the global level, or closed. Open for global climate change agreement, open for global trade, open for global security arrangements or not. In that sense, Europe is just a sub-issue of a much wider issue, which I like to call open or closed. So if that is the challenge, then the question is, can the European Union also protect? Or do we need to leave protection to those new parties, those new political forces who are arguing for closure. I believe that the Bratislava agenda established by the European Council in November 2016 is exactly such an agenda of protection when it comes to safe borders, immigration, terrorism, but also security and defense. But if the European Union goes into those new issues, it means that also our working mechanisms have to change. We are brilliant, I would say, as a legislative machine. 500 amendments, 1,000 amendments, 1,500 amendments, 3,000 amendments, no problem. If we need to do 60, 70, 80 rounds of trilogues with the Council, we are not really impressed. We come to a good result. So we are doing this, of course, in 24 languages. We are doing this well. So we are a very well established legislative machine. Maybe we could even argue we are the most sophisticated legislative machine because our system is one of the most complex, if not the most complex system globally. But if we go into those new areas of protection, not everything will be about legislation. It might also have to be about something which I call complementary executive capacity. So where a member state cannot provide that protection himself, it might address to the European level for support, and one of the examples I would like to give is Bulgaria and border protection with Turkey, Greece, now the operations in the Mediterranean. But you could even say that the ESM fund, which helped member states in difficulties, was such a central instrument that complemented executive capacity missing on the national level. So if that is the situation, how does it relate to citizens' beliefs? I know opinion polls about the European Union for more than 25 years, somewhere between 25 and 30 years. And there was always something strange, because when you ask people where did they want more Europe, the areas where they wanted more Europe was normally foreign affairs, security and defense, fight against international crime, immigration, and it were exactly the areas where the European Union hasn't really delivered. Whereas where citizens had less request for more Europe, this is the areas where we have been active. So there has been a mismatch between citizens' expectations and deliveries. Or to put it into an image, where citizens were looking for an elephant, we've been delivering a mouse. But where citizens were already happy with the mouse, we were busy producing an elephant. So the elephant they wanted was foreign affairs, security and defense, immigration, border protection, security and defense. That's where we were delivering a mouse, and the other areas exactly the other way round. But if citizens have the impression that for the big risks in life the European Union is not relevant, then we are eroding the base of support. We are now entering into a very interesting phase, because I believe that the phase of crisis management, urgency actions, where we simply had to survive, where sometimes in Belgium we were during a weekend not knowing whether a bank would be opening on Monday or wouldn't exist anymore. I mean, these times have existed. I think this time is over, and we are seeing clearly a new impulse for European integration. We had a very ambitious speech of President of the Commission, Jean-Claude Juncker, in the last Strasbourg session, where he outlined his vision for the European Union. We are going to see a similar effort by newly elected President Macron of France next Tuesday, where he will put forward his vision for the future of the European Union. And I also believe that in Germany, after the elections, the conditions will again be there to consider more far-reaching initiatives. also Mr. Trump is doing a lot to convince us that we have to develop our own capacities. So we are going from firefighting potentially to design, but then the question is what kind of design? It seems that we are having two different visions on the table. If we are listening to President Juncker during our last plenary session, he was making a proposal which is the whole European Union, all 27, in the midterm, let's say 10 years, should be united in the core policies. That means border protection, Schengen for everyone, Euro for everyone, functioning security and defense. It might be, we will listen carefully, that President Macron next Tuesday will outline the basic ideas for the completion of the Eurozone, which is still a community of 19. So the completion of the Euro, the 5 unions that are not yet built, are relatively easy to describe. The Euro, the finalization of the Euro architecture, security and defense, safe borders, Schengen, and terrorism. It also comes very handy that before next summer, the European Commission will make a proposal of the financial perspectives, MFF, we don't know for 7 years, 5 years, or 2 times 5 years. So that should be the logical moment to then provide the financing for the political vision that has been agreed on. So we are living in interesting times. We are going out of crisis management. I believe that for all of us, for all of you who are providing members with expertise, this will be exciting months ahead of us. Thank you very much.